Let's start with a question that has probably crossed your mind more than once when scanning a race card. Does the draw really matter? If you've ever looked at a big field sprint at Chester or a Beverley 5 furlong dash, you'll know the feeling. All the chatter points one way. You've got to be low drawn here, or don't touch a horse stuck out wide. And sometimes it feels almost magical how often those patterns play out. Certain stalls at certain tracks seem cursed, others blessed. Entire betting decisions are made in seconds, based purely on draw position. But here's the truth. Draw bias is one of the most misunderstood, overused and oversimplified angles in UK racing. Yes, some tracks, Chester, Beverley, Lingfield's all-weather, have well-documented draw biases that can turn races into near processions. But plenty of what punters think of as bias is little more than myth, selective memory, or misinterpretation of statistics. And even where genuine biases exist, they are not fluid, not fixed. Field size, pace setup, ground conditions, they all influence whether the bias holds or breaks. So in today's deep dive, we're going to look to unpack draw bias properly. By the end, you'll understand three crucial things. The most famous draw biases in UK racing, what they are and why they exist, some common myths, how punters deceive themselves by treating draw bias as an absolute truth, how to use field size and race shape to sharpen your analysis, turning draw bias from a blunt cliche into a sharp, logical tool. And stick with me until the end, because I'm also going to give you a way to grab my red flag method mini course for free. It's a practical framework that helps you consistently spot and lay weak favourites, the perfect complement to what we'll cover today. Alright, let's get into it. When we talk about draw bias in UK racing, three venues almost always dominate the conversation: Chester, Beverley and Lingfield's all-weather track. So the first is Chester, or the Rudy. Chester is legendary for its low draw bias, particularly over 5 and 6 furlongs. Why? Because the track is the tightest left-hand circuit in Britain. The first bend comes up almost immediately in sprints, and a horse drawn wide can be forced to run extra ground just to get position. By contrast, a low drawn runner can hug the rail and save vital lengths. Studies consistently show that stall 1 at Chester in big sprints has an unusually high strike rate. In fact, in some seasons, the bias is so pronounced that the market heavily shortens low drawn runners regardless of form. But, and we'll come back to this later, the effect diminishes as field sizes shrink. A 5 runner dash at Chester is nothing like a 14 runner cavalry charge. Beverley, the 5 furlong sprint. So Beverley's 5 furlong trip is notorious. The track has a stiff uphill finish and, crucially, a bend that comes very early. Low drawn horses can secure the rail position before the bend. High drawn horses risk being shuffled wide and losing ground before the straight. The effect is especially pronounced in large fields with 12 or more runners. The combination of the bend and the stiff finish makes wide draws a nightmare. However, just like Chester, once the field sizes shrink, the bias weakens, and occasionally ground conditions can flip the script. Lingfield on the all-weather, the inside edge. On the all-weather at Lingfield, especially over shorter trips, the inside draws have a clear statistical advantage. The sharp turning nature of the track rewards those close to the rail. Horses breaking from wider stalls often have to burn energy to gain position, or they risk being trapped wide throughout. But, and again this is the key, Lingfield also shows us how pace interacts with draw. A wide drawn horse with early speed can sometimes neutralise the bias by getting across quickly. So these three courses, Chester, Beverley and Lingfield on the all-weather, are the poster children for draw bias. Punters often obsess over them, but here's what we need to be careful. Not every apparent bias is real, and even the real ones are not constant. So let's tackle the uncomfortable truth. A lot of what punters think of as draw bias is just myth making. Myth 1. Bias is fixed. The most common error is assuming that bias is absolute. Phrases like, you can't win from stall 12 here. The reality is more nuanced. Biases ebb and flow based on field size, pace and ground. What looks like a bias in a big field might evaporate in a smaller field. At Chester, yes, low draws dominate large fields, but in 6-runner races, wide draws can and do win, especially if the low draw lacks early pace. Myth 2. Bias is universal across distances. Another mistake to make is assuming that bias applies across all trips. Take Beverley. The low draw bias has the strongest effect at 5 furlongs, but stretch it out to 7.5 furlongs and the picture changes entirely. The longer run to the bend plus the uphill finish alters the dynamics. Each distance at each track needs to be considered separately. Myth 3. Recent anecdotes equal long-term truth. Punters often latch on to short-term runs. 3 wide drawn runners in a week, suddenly the bias is dead. But variance in racing is high. A few results prove nothing. Only long-term data, years of races, hundreds of samples, can reveal genuine patterns. Myth 4. Bias explains everything. Sometimes punters use bias as a crutch to explain away poor analysis. A favourite gets beaten from a wide draw, I couldn't win from the wide draw. Winner comes from stall 1, the bias did it. But that thinking ignores pace, form and class. Bias is rarely the sole determinant. It's one factor amongst many. Myth 5. Biases never change. Tracks evolve. Rails are moved. Surfaces are relaid. Drainage improves. What was true 10 years ago may not be true today. For example, Lingfield's all-weather surface has gone through lots of changes, and each iteration has slightly altered how the draw plays out. Punters who don't update their assumptions get stuck betting ghosts. The lesson? Treat draw bias as a fluid concept, not a fixed law. Otherwise, it becomes more foe than friend. So, how can we use field size to sharpen our analysis? Let's get practical. If a draw bias isn't fixed, how do we use it properly? The biggest factor to overlay is the field size. So why does field size matter? If you think about geometry, in a 16-runner sprint at Chester, stall 14 has to cover significantly more ground to reach the bend. That extra yardage is a real disadvantage. But in a 6-runner race, stall 6 isn't nearly as far out. The horse can slot in more easily. The bend is less congested. Field size dictates how much the physical track layout magnifies or dampens the draw effect. Let's take a case study at Chester over 5 furlongs. In a 12+ runner field, low draws dominate. Stall 1 still has a huge edge. In 6 to 8 runner fields, the edge shrinks. A high drawn horse with early pace can cross over. Beverley over 5 furlongs. In big fields, high stalls are a graveyard. Horses get trapped wide into the bend. In small fields, the bias often disappears. Horses can travel straighter lines. At Lingfield on the poly track, inside draws are golden in big fields. wide runners risk being trapped 3 or 4 wide throughout. But in 6-runner races, a wide drawn horse can press early and slot in without burning too much energy. So how should punters use this? Always check the field size. Before making any draw-based judgment, look at the number of runners. Big fields, bias amplified. Small fields, bias diminished. Overlay pace maps. A high draw can be rescued by early speed. A low draw can be wasted if the horse breaks slowly. Field size interacts with pace. And avoid lazy cliches. Don't just parrot, you need stall 1 at Chester. Ask, in this specific race with this field size and this pace setup, how much will the draw matter? By sharpening your analysis with field size, you stop treating bias as a blunt tool and turn it into a scalpel. So let's step back and recap the framework for intelligent draw analysis. Firstly, identify some genuine biases, Chester, Beverley, Lingfield or Weather. Avoid myths. Remember, biases are not fixed, not universal and not eternal. Overlay the field size. Ask how many runners are in the race and how that magnifies or reduces the bias. Blend pace and class. A low draw without pace can be meaningless. A high draw with class and speed can overcome the bias. This is the logical, structured way to think about the draw. It moves us away from punted cliches and towards an evidence-based framework. And that, ultimately, is what separates disciplined bettors from recreational ones. So, is draw bias a friend or a foe? Like many tools in racing, it depends on how you use it. If you treat it as an absolute law, it will lead you astray. If you use it lazily, and you'll fall into the same traps as everyone else. But treat it as a fluid factor, one that interacts with field size, pace, class and conditions, and it becomes a genuine edge. Remember, racing is never about single factors, it's about frameworks, structure and logic. At Money Horse, that's our ethos. We don't deal in hype or guesswork, we give punters logical methods that they can apply consistently. And if you want to take the first step, I'd encourage you to try the red flag method. It's a free mini course that shows you how to consistently spot and lay weak favourites. It takes less than 5 minutes a day to apply, and it gives you the discipline that most punters are missing. You can grab it now at https://moneyhorse.info/red-flag-method. Because while draw bias can help you find winners, the red flag method helps you avoid losers. Put that together and it's a powerful combination. So don't fall for myths, don't parrot cliches, think logically, bet with structure, and you'll see racing in a whole new light. Until next time, thanks for listening, and may the rails, the draws, and the methods always be in your favour. And as always, win quietly.